That can be things like a visual strip. It can be more of a set calendar type thing within the home. There may be a few different types. We may use a larger sized calendar. We may have little visual strips that kind of say how our day is going. And then consistent routines pair with that. So that's, my kiddo knows that every day we get up, we brush our teeth, we get dressed, we have breakfast, we leave. And then, they know that we come home, we take our boots and backpacks off, we play for half an hour, we eat supper together, then we have a playtime, and then we start our bedtime routine. And that our bedtime routine is fairly consistent as well. And we can have a special visual schedule that's just for our bedtime routine. And that creates that predictability. And that's not to say that we can't build flexibility into that. It's creating those standard routines and predictability help our kiddos have a sense of calm and order and understanding of their day. And then when we do have things that are surprising, we can prep for that, and we can have conversations, and we can do some other things to build some kind of flexibility and capacity. As far as separation anxiety, I think most of you are probably familiar with that term, but it seems to be more and more common. Even just anecdotally from me, I've been in this position for about 10 years now, and just watching the kiddos come into the program every fall, we seem to have kind of an uptick in that separation anxiety piece since COVID, which correlates with that research that we talked about at the beginning, having that increase in anxiety since COVID. And so a lot of times when we see that separation anxiety, we see a lot of the really nervousness for parents to leave, clinging to them, maybe some crying, things like that. So some strategies that we use to deal with that is gradual separation. Now, I'd like to clarify that doesn't mean that we're slowly separating you. What that means is we're starting with smaller pieces of time, and we're increasing the time. So if you've never been away from your kiddo before, the first time you leave them maybe shouldn't be for a 3-day vacation. Maybe it's, you leave for, even if your kid is very anxious for separation, maybe it's a 5-minute shower. It can be that small of a separation, and then coming back and, increasing that time to 10 minutes to run to the post office and coming back. And okay, well, now I'm going to do a Costco run. So I'm going to be gone an hour, and then I'm coming back. And just really reinforcing that when I go, I come back. And then when we get to school times and things like that, we can sustain that longer time. And, where it says gradual separation, well, I'm going to speak specifically to school, that it's not that, okay, I'm coming into the school, and okay, I'm going to leave in 5 minutes, and okay, well, you're still struggling, so I'm going to stay another 5. For separation anxiety, I like to say kind of your best bet is to rip it off like a Band-Aid. It's that, okay, here's the routine when we go to school, and it can be pre-taught that, okay, when we get to school, I'm going to walk you to your door, and then your teacher is going to meet you. And when your teacher meets you, I'm going to leave. And it's kind of that immediate separation is a little bit easier in the long run for the child. And I know that can be really hard as a parent, especially when our kiddos get upset. But I can assure you on our end, by the time they get into the building, they usually calm down pretty quickly. But the longer we drag out that actual physical separation piece, it's a lot more challenging for the child. So we really, and if we remember back to last week when we were talking about those ABCs of behavior, what we're teaching in that moment is that when we scream, cry, cling to mom's leg, whatever, mom stays. And so we're really teaching that, we're kind of pairing that behavior has the consequence that then mom stays. And so we kind of need to separate those two to know that, okay, well, when it's time for school, or when it's time for mom to go to an appointment, or for dad to go to work, or whatever it is, that we have to leave. And that happens kind of regardless of how we're acting, and we can teach some we can teach some coping skills and stuff in that. I just want to be really clear that that gradual separation is talking about gradually increasing the time that we're away from our kiddos and reinforcing that we always come back, and not gradually doing the physical separation at the actual time that we are separating. Transitional objects can be helpful. So that might even be something if you've got a spare set of keys for, an apartment that you used to live in when you were 20 and you still have it, give that to your kiddo when they get to school and say, these are mom's house keys. I'm coming back. I have to come back because I need my keys to get home. And, it can be something like that it's something they think is useful to you that you need to come back for, or something special. Or it could be, that they're wearing one of your bracelets, or they've got a little keychain from home that makes them think of a special outing they had with dad, or whatever it is. It can be any kind of object that's small and not valuable that they can take with them to school, but something that they're not necessarily going to get very, very stuck on. So, it'd be really tricky to use a transitional object like an iPad to take them, because we're using that more as a distraction. But then still, once they get in the building, we have to then take that away from them and figure out how to get them back into class. So that's not really what this means. This is more so something that would be an emotional support for them that they could physically bring with them to either remind them of home or reassure them that their special person is coming back. And that it's, something really important that they have to make sure they have at the end of the day, or something that, they can leave in their locker, or that if it gets lost in the day isn't going to be a big deal. Something like that. So we can use those transitional objects sometimes. It can even be a sticky note that you've written something on that you give to them and say, oh, this is a really important message that I need later, so I need you to hold on to it for me. It can kind of be anything. You can get creative with it. And then really those positive reinforcements. So reinforcing that they did a really good job, or remembering back to, hey, remember when you were a little bit nervous when I left you at grandma's house for my dentist appointment? But remember, you and grandma baked cookies and you had so much fun. So reminding them of times they've been successful in the past, and then really reinforcing when they do separate. And so that's something on our end. We do that, if we know there's a kiddo who's got some separation anxiety and the parents leave, we immediately try and distract, and we give lots of positive reinforcements. So bubbles and high fives and good jobs and all those things to really reinforce just being there and recognizing that that is hard for that kiddo. And then we'll move on to social anxiety. So for social anxiety, that can be where we kind of see that maybe that hesitancy to join other kiddos, some apprehension around, well, what if the kids are mean to me? Or what if they take my toys? Or things like that. So some strategies we use to deal with that are small group activities. So introducing a couple kids. Oftentimes children with social anxiety can handle one-on-one play. Not always, but sometimes they can handle one-on-one play with a preferred peer, but it can get a little bit trickier when we add a few more kids in. So that may be, for at home, that may be going to the park when it might be a touch busier than, if you're lucky enough to be able to go at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning and there's never anybody there. Well, maybe you try and go after school when there might be a few kids there, or later in the evening when some kids have come out to play after supper. Or maybe you join a parent-led group at the library or something like that, where you're interacting with more than just one kid. And though some of those, parented programs through the library or things like that have more level of support that you can lend to them in that time to give them some of that security. And we're also wanting to model some positive social interactions. So they need to see you doing really great pro-social things. So having conversations with people, speaking with the checkout clerk at the library, or talking to the person at the grocery store, or asking for help in a store if you can't find something, or you can even pretend that you can't find something, just so that you have an opportunity to model how you would go up to somebody in Canadian Tire to ask them where the tire gauges are. Whatever it is, you can get creative with it, but you're really demonstrating for your child how to interact in a social environment. And then those alternate means of response and participation. So you don't always have to speak, or you don't always have to jump in the game. And so if we have a lot of that fear and apprehension, that might be, maybe you really want your kid involved with sports, but you know that where they're at right now, there's no way they would be able to join minor soccer and be able to just jump in and play along. So maybe one night when you know that there's some kids playing at a local soccer field, maybe you take your lawn chair and you go and watch, and you encourage them to clap for somebody, or kind of that more passive participation where we're still kind of watching from the periphery. We're getting a little bit of that social interaction. We can maybe start to encourage maybe waving at somebody, or, and as it goes on, we're kind of building that capacity that maybe next season we'd be able to get to the point where we could join in. Okay, so for classroom strategies and our classroom environment, these are things that we try and do within the schools. And they're things that you can definitely try out at home too. So we talked about those really structured and predictable routines and procedures. So we have our standard thing. Every classroom has their little visual schedule that every day, the kids come in, we do opening circle, we have playtime, we have bathroom and snack, whatever it is. We have our set schedule. The kids know the routines. They learn kind of those classroom rules of, okay, well, when it's time for bathroom, we sit on the carpet until our teacher calls us. Then we line up at the door. The special helper takes the soap, whatever it is. But they learn those routines. And you can create those within your home as well that are kind of those standard procedures, so that, when you say supper time, the kids know that that means devices are off, toys are put away, whatever it is. They go wash their hands, they come to the table. And so we have to take the time to teach those routines, but the more consistent we are in them, then we create that structure and that predictability. And then there's that finding that sweet spot of exposure and participation and kind of pushing a little bit of that envelope without pushing them over the edge. And so that's where, I bring up that soccer example. So if we know our kiddo is very anxious and they would not thrive joining, we're not just going to necessarily sign them up for soccer, drive up, drop them off, and drive away. That's probably not going to work very well. Whereas if they are capable of doing that, okay, well, then we know we can maybe push that. But if we know we have a lot of anxiety, then that's maybe where, we go watch. Or if we're really nervous about trying new things because we don't know how to do it, maybe we learn at home a little bit first and we learn some rules of soccer, or we watch some YouTube videos on soccer. Whatever it is, we kind of have to play that balance of knowing our kiddo. And that's where that next one comes in, as baby steps. We have to make sure we're always still moving forward. It's not just, well, my kid's scared of that, so we don't do that. Or, well, separating from me is really hard, so we just always stay together. Realistically, at some point, we're going to have to separate, or at some point, we're going to have to talk to other people. Or, at some point, we might see a bird and have to not totally freak out, because I get a lot of people are scared of birds. So it's making sure that we're always kind of taking steps to work toward that anxiety becoming functional again and not really impeding. So empathetic responses, that's where we're acknowledging that it's a tricky time, right? And that it's hard and that it is scary, and we can do some pre-teaching so we can have some accommodating for alternatives. But I'd like to be very clear that that's not just avoiding altogether, that, we can acknowledge, hey, I know this is really scary for you, or hey, I know it's really tough to meet a big group of new kids. So you know what? Instead of going and seeing all these new kids, how about we just have 2 of them over and we can have a little play date where you're comfortable. Things like that, where we're still kind of pushing that baby step boundary, but we're really letting our child know that we get it. We see that it's uncomfortable and hard for them, but we still need to kind of push through it, which brings us to that excessive reassurance piece. Sometimes when we talk things out a lot, it can feel like, we're hashing it out. We're talking about all the things. We're really reassuring them it's going to be okay. We've talked about this. We've gone through the whole routine of what to expect. You know exactly who's going to be there, how we're getting there, what we're doing when we're there, how long we're there. We've gone through all of it. I keep telling you it's going to be okay. We're on the way there. We're still talking about it. That can actually increase the anxiety. So when we have excessive reassurance, or we're kind of addressing it too much, it's a lot, because we're making it like it is a big deal, right? Whereas if it's something that really shouldn't be a big deal, it is to our kiddo. We can acknowledge that, hey, I know this is a big deal for you, but here's kind of how it's going to go. Here's our plan, and then we move on. If we really keep ruminating on it, we're really just feeding into that anxiety piece. And then we really want to emphasize the role of positive peer interactions in reducing anxiety. So I've seen it a number of times over the years when we've had a kiddo who's come in fairly anxious, and then they make that one little friend. And as soon as they make that friend kind of helps them along. And it's really quite lovely to see. And so really fostering that however we can, and reinforcing that building friendships helps a lot. Okay, so some evidence-based practices that we have. One of kind of the big umbrellas here is cognitive behavioral techniques. And there's a few things that fall under there. And so we're going to talk about each of them. And I also have available on the website an additional sheet of resources and activities. There's 2 separate ones. And some of these will show up on those as well for the activities, and some ideas of how to kind of implement these at home. So for relaxation techniques, so one of those things might be balloon breath. So that's where you tell your child their belly is a balloon. You have them take a deep breath through their nose, filling up their balloon so their belly expands, slowly breathing out through their mouth, deflating their balloon. And you do that 3 to 5 times. It helps those big deep breaths. There's lots of different deep breathing exercises. Some kiddos like to, blow bubbles, like you pretend that you have a piece of gum and you're blowing your bubble. There's a whole bunch of different ways that you can do it. They all promote that really deep breathing, which is super regulating and calming. There's another one that I really like to do that as pencil robot jellyfish. So you get your kiddo to stand up and stretch really, really tall, stretch everything like a pencil, as tall as you can get, or a tower. And then a robot, you squeeze everything really, really tight. You squeeze all your muscles. And then jellyfish, you flop over and wiggle and jiggle everywhere, all loosey-goosey. And so that is working on muscle relaxation and can help relax the body. For mindfulness, we can listen to some meditations. There's a really great free resource that's New Horizon Holistic Center. They do a bunch of different guided meditations. They're available on YouTube and Spotify and kind of all over the place. You could play a 5 senses game. So you can get your kiddo to name 5 things they can see, 4 things they can touch, 3 things they can hear, 2 things they can smell, 1 thing they can taste. So it brings their focus to the present moment and kind of bringing them back into themselves and kind of away from the anxiety or the thing that's creating that anxiety. You can also do it with a snack and have a mindful snack. So you might give your child a small piece of food, like a raisin or a cracker, and ask them to eat it really slowly and describe the shape, the color before they eat it, the texture, the taste. You can get them to smell it before they eat it. The same thing, it helps them refocus to the present and practice that self-regulation piece. Chewing in and of itself is very regulating. So that chewing and swallowing can kind of get us out of that panic and bring us back into our senses. That kind of goes hand in hand with grounding, because grounding is also a technique that brings you back to the present when you're feeling overwhelmed. So you can use those mindfulness techniques just to teach mindfulness when they're not elevated, or if they are kind of starting to panic, you can use them in those moments as a grounding technique. Another one would be, teaching them to give themselves a hug. So you can get your kid to wrap their arms around themselves, give themselves a big squeeze. It provides deep pressure. It's something they can do on their own. They don't need somebody to facilitate that for them. They can stomp their worries out. So they can imagine that their worries are tiny bugs on the floor, and they can stomp on each worry bug, and they can name it while they're stomping. So if they're scared of the dark, they can stomp it or whatever. It can give them a sense of control over their fears. Or there's 3, 3, and 3. So you can name 3 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch, 3 things you can see. It's easy to do anywhere. So if we're, in the car and we're driving and our kiddo starts to get agitated about something that they're starting to worry about, it can be a pretty quick switch of, hey, what are 3 things you can see right now? What 3 things can you hear? What can you feel around you? Cognitive restructuring. So that's where we're turning our thoughts around and we're replacing them with more helpful ones. So if your child says, why I can't go to that birthday party, it's too scary, then we can help them replace that thought with, I might feel nervous at first, but I can have fun. Or, well, dad will be there to help me. Or things like that, right? We're flipping that narrative. Another kind of fun one is, what would a superhero say? So you can ask them, well, what would Spider-Man say if they had this worry? What do you think Spider-Man would do if he was scared to go to the party? So it can help shift their mindset toward that confidence piece, and kind of helping them be their own little superhero. And oftentimes when we're talking about anxiety, we talk about you have to name it to tame it. And we can kind of talk back to our worry. And once we learn that it is our worry talking for us, or, if they want to name it or whatever, one of the psychologists who used to work with me used to say she had a client who was rather clever, and he named his worry Richard. And so he would talk back to Richard and knew that it was just Richard that was telling him these negative thoughts and that it wasn't actually him. And so that can be really powerful for kiddos too. Once they learn that it's their worry talking, it's not them, then they can kind of talk back to it. So one example of that, when my oldest son was about that pre-K age, he all of a sudden got freaked out that there was a ghost or a monster in our house, and it came out of nowhere. And he got really scared of it, and he was having a hard time going to sleep, and we couldn't figure out why or what it was. And so, we started getting him to talk back to it. So we said, tell the monster to go away. And so we tried that, and it didn't really work. The monster kept coming back. And then I kind of flipped to this cognitive restructuring where, because I couldn't quite convince him that it was his worry that was making up the monster, and the monster wasn't real. So talking back wasn't working quite as well as I wanted it to. So then we switched to this restructuring, and one day I kind of said to him, I said, look, do you know that this monster is bad? He said, well, nobody's scary. I said, well, why is he scary? Because he's a monster. I said, okay, well, why don't we fight the monster for tea? And let's see. So we kind of planned it. And then, my son kind of called out to the house like, hey, monster, come for tea. So he had laid out tea and a biscotti for him and whatever. And the monster came and sat down with us. And as we sat and had tea and acknowledged the monster was there, we found out that the monster was named Fred. And the monster was the same age as my son. And he was actually really nice. He liked to play with trains too. And he also really liked to ride his bike. And he had a mom and a dad, and he just came to visit us sometimes because he thought that my son was really cool and had some cool toys that he wanted to play with. And this led to my son having an imaginary friend for like 4 years, and he loved Fred. Fred came everywhere with us. He came on holidays. He did all the things. But we went from not being able to sleep at night and being terrified of Fred to Fred being one of our best friends that hung out with us all the time, because we did a bit of some cognitive restructuring and learned that, Fred maybe wasn't so scary. So, sorry, back from story time. Some gradual exposure. So let's look at say we're scared of dogs. So gradual exposure is going to help you face that fear, but in small, manageable steps. So if we're scared of dogs, we're not going to, or if our kiddo is scared of dogs, we're not going to take them to a dog park and immediately get them to go pet a big Great Dane. That would be terrifying. But we want to make those baby steps towards that. So we might start with looking at pictures of friendly, happy dogs, maybe even cartoon dogs. We might watch a video of a calm dog, old corgi napping. We might then see a dog from a distance, or even while we're driving, looking at dogs walking down the street. We might stand near a dog, and by near I mean not that near, holding our parent's hand. We might gotta work towards getting a little closer. Eventually we might gently pet the dog. So each step is done at the child's pace and with encouragement, and it depends on our level of fear. If our level of fear is super intense, we're going to have to do a lot more steps than just 5. Whereas if it's we're just a little bit nervous, we might be able to go through those steps a little bit quicker. Or like I mentioned with that separation anxiety, if it's really intense, it might be that, the parent leaves the room for 2 minutes. And then we're gradually increasing that time while reassuring the child that they're safe and that that person's going to return. We can also do a lot of role playing to practice. So, let's say if your child is anxious about meeting a new teacher, or they're starting a dance class and they've got a new teacher. And so you might pretend to be the teacher and get your kid to come in and practice. Hi, my name is Anne. Really simple, but it's working on that practice and that teaching your kiddo how to handle themselves in those social situations. So we can role play all sorts of common situations, like ordering at a restaurant, or asking for help, or asking a friend to play, or even accepting somebody else asking them to play. So it might be that you're pretending to be the friend and you come up and say, hey, my name is Amy. Would you like to play with me? And getting your kid to practice saying, sure. And so that can help reduce the anxiety by making the situation familiar, things that they've kind of come across before. We can also run kind of experiments. So experiments help us challenge anxious thoughts by testing them in real life. So we can play what happens if. So this might be where your child worries that no one will play with them, and then we get them to test the theory and ask somebody to play with them. And then you can discuss after, well, did your worry come true? And especially if you've got that kid that's kind of science-minded, you can really swing this one into, well, let's be scientists. Let's see, let's do an experiment. Let's see what happens. We can also make a bravery jar. So every time your child does something that makes them nervous, like saying hello to a new person, they get to put a marble in the jar. And then over time, they have a really great visual representation to see all the brave things that they've done. So then if something new comes up scary, you can say, well, look at all these brave things that you've done. And so it's reinforcing that, they're not a scaredy cat. They're actually really brave, and they're doing a lot of brave things. We also have the remote control technique. So this helps children take control of their anxious thoughts, like using a TV remote. So you can pause, rewind, fast forward. So if a child is feeling anxious, have them hit the imaginary pause button and take a breath. And then rewind to think about a time when they've handled something similar, maybe from their bravery jar. And then you can fast forward to picture the positive outcome, how it might work out for them. And then you can hit play and go back to your day. You can also use the remote for volume control. So if your child has a loud worry voice, and we're naming it and saying that's our worry talking. So if they've got a loud worry voice in their head, tell them to imagine turning the volume down like a remote control. And they can practice saying, I'm in charge of my thoughts. My worry is not in charge. I am. So these cognitive behavioral therapies are all based on connecting our thoughts, feelings, and actions, and that those three are all interconnected with each other. So it's really important that we have collaboration between the school and parents. So we want communication. We want the importance of having everybody on the same page, and that we can share our observations and insights and things that maybe work for us at the school addressing anxiety. And you can share your experiences at home, or, well, yeah, you know what? Actually, they had a really rough night last night. They were actually really nervous about the new reading buddies that are coming in, or whatever it is. So, because sometimes our kids are really good at masking their anxieties too. So on the school end, we might not know that they're feeling anxious about something. So we really like having a lot of that back and forth communication between the school and parents. Um, we also like to offer as many parent workshops as we can, like this one, or consultation. We're always up for, our therapy team is always available for you to reach out and get in touch with us. And then we can also work with you for some referrals to community agencies like CASA, or communication with your doctor, if you want us to write a letter of support, things like that, or Alberta Mental Health Services. Elm Tree is one that does a lot of early child, like preschool psychiatry sort of things. Pediatric psychiatry. That's the word I was looking for. Okay. So I have some resources listed here, but like I said, I have a more comprehensive list that will be in PDF on the website. I didn't want to clutter up the slide too much. It makes it tricky, and then you got to come back to the slideshow every time. So some of the recommendations that I've made in that PDF are evidence-based resources for managing anxiety in preschoolers. So for websites, we've got Anxiety Canada, which is fantastic. There's parent-friendly articles, interactive tools, step-by-step strategies for managing childhood anxiety. They've got a lot of great resources on there. There's the Child Mind Institute. They talk about anxiety disorders in young children. There's evidence-based articles. They talk about separation anxiety a lot, and a lot of practical parenting strategies. There's also the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. They provide a more trauma lens. So it's trauma-informed resources on childhood anxiety and stress management. So that one is specific to trauma-based anxieties. And then there's the Harvard Center on the Developing Child. They also have research-backed information on early childhood development, including emotional regulation. And then one of the websites I have listed on here is at 0 to 3. So that's more that practical tips on helping preschoolers build emotional resilience. Then there's a whole bunch of really great books. So some books for parents is The Whole Brain Child by Daniel Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. And it explains how young children's brains process emotions and how parents can respond to anxiety effectively. All these books are commonly available at the library. They're readily accessible. They're not kind of obscure books that you're going to have a hard time finding. There's another one called Helping Your Anxious Child, a step-by-step guide for parents. And that's by Ronald Rapie. It's a practical research-based guide using CBT strategies at home. So that's that cognitive behavioral techniques that we were talking about earlier. That book is all about those sorts of strategies. Then there's another one that I'd like to recommend that's called Growing Up Brave, Expert Strategies for Helping Your Child Overcome Fear, Stress, and Anxiety. And that's by Donna Pincus. So that one's written by a clinical psychologist who specializes in childhood anxiety. There's some really great books for preschoolers. One called When Worry Takes Hold. There's called Wilma Jean and the Worry Machine. So that one kind of teaches kids about managing worries in a fun, more relatable way. And there's A Little Spot of Anxiety, a story about calming your worries. And the little spot, it's a whole series and they cover a wide variety of topics. There's little spot of anger, anxiety, little spot of calm. There's a bunch of little spot as a whole series that are all really great emotional intelligence tools. Within the schools, we also typically we teach, the color monster and things like that your child may already be familiar with. There's really great resources online. Most of these books you can even find read aloud on YouTube, so that you can access them kind of anytime. And then there's some really great resources online for printable tools and worksheets. So there's the Big Life Journal, which is anxiety and mindful printables for kids. So they have some free printable coping tools, growth mindset activities, and relaxation exercises. If you have some older kids, you can also order them online, and they actually come as a journal that your kid can independently do, not so much for pre-K, but for our older kiddos. And then coping skills for kids, anxiety worksheets and activities. So the website is copingskillsforkids.com. Same thing, practical printables on breathing exercises, grounding techniques, and worry management. So like I said, I'll have this complete list up on the website so you can access it along with the list of activities that you can try at home. One of them is, for example, there's how to make a glitter worry jar or anxiety jar. Call it whatever you want, but it's use glitter and glue and stuff, and it makes this jar that they can tip it and kind of watch all the glitter go everywhere and watch it settle. And you get to talk about how that relates to anxiety within your body and taking time to settle. And it's all written out in step by step, kind of how to do it with your kiddo and what you'll need to do it. So there's a bunch of activities similar to that you are welcome to access, and I encourage you to do so and share that with anyone else you know who may be interested. And for any other questions, please always reach out to me. My name again is Erin Sheehan. My email is erin.sheehan@sturgeon.ab.ca. You can always ask your teacher how to get in touch with me or anyone on our therapy team. We're always happy to talk to parents and help out however we can. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a great day.